board meeting. Members present: Neil MacGyver, Pat Roach, Vice Chair John Manlett, Chair Mike Ahern, Paul Wilson, Bob Dragon, alternate, and John Kelly, and Town Planner Sharon Penny. At this point, are there any general public comments?
Do you want to point out officially?
Yeah, and we're also going to appoint Bob Dragon to sit in on tonight's meeting as a voting member.
Voting member, thank you. Yep.
Seeing no comments from the public, brings us to item number 4, administrative matters. Review of the following application in public hearing. A site plan review for PID 213-012, commercial building, retail building, Hamilton Way by Excel Management, in the Plymouth Business Park. We have Dennis Prescott here today, but do you want to give a review before we?
Just very generally, you can either, I'll just do it extemporaneously. This is a Plymouth Business Park out on Tenny Mountain Highway. The vicinity is, for identification purposes, is essentially across from Sears. The planning board gave approval to this small business park, I believe, 3 years ago. It was just before I got here. There is one established furniture business there already. If you use that as your locus, directly across Hamilton Way, which is the interior street off Tenny Mountain Highway, is the lot in question that's going to be developed. Dennis Prescott of XL Management is here. He will be the builder, and he's brought his engineer from Horizons Engineering in Littleton, so both those gentlemen can speak to this. I've passed out a preliminary, a very general review by our town engineer, Mike Vignali, based on the plans that we have gotten to date, and he has made some recommendations, which he usually does, very thorough, so those will be taken into consideration and addressed, I'm sure, by the engineer. So essentially, this area is being developed the way it should be. The site, the actual site has been developed, it's just awaiting tenants, and that's what's going to be happening now.
Excuse me, I have a question for clarification. Is this building going to house a business which is independent from, or is it going to be connected in any way through a business relationship with the existing business?
It is. Yes, it's associated with, so I think we'll get the details on that when the presentation ensues.
So Dennis, if you want to.
Not much of a presentation kind of guy, but my name's Dennis Prescott. I've been an area resident since I'm actually one of the last true people in New Hampshire. I was born in Laconia. So, long and short of it, Art Card owns the little furniture store across from Steers on the right. He has outgrown his space, and if you go out there, you'll see a number of containers on the adjacent property. He's trying to alleviate, one, his own business being squished into containers, and two, a much larger retail space. The proposed 10,000 square feet for about 7,000 square feet of retail and 3,000 square feet of storage. That gets rid of the container issue. As far as your question, for the first year, it'll be an associated business. He's going to continue to lease. We're doing a trade, but in long and short of it, I'll own his building that he's in today. He will buy the new building, move over there, and he'll lease that one building for me for a year till he's fully functional in the new building. We anticipate about 6-month build out to get him into the building, only because we're going into winter. And I won't be able to pave, obviously, in December. The building's a wood frame structure, very similar to what's there now. You got a little picture with a little farmer's porch, if you will, on the front. That's for display. Basically a big box to put his furniture store in. One of the questions on the engineer's review comments were we have a very wide mouth on the entranceway coming into the site. That is due to the tractor trailers having a tough time getting in and out. So the proposal is to drive up Hamilton Way, which is a private roadway, and back into the loading dock, and then pull back out to the right. That's why that mouth is so wide. There's another comment on there about the electrical that is in the road right away. as far as the electric vault goes. I've just barely got the notes, so I'm kind of going out of memory. As far as the DOT traffic, we were approved originally with the roadway to service the lots for said use, so there's no additional use there. We are not impacting any environmentally sensitive zone, we're not impacting wetlands, we're not impacting the high water floodplain either. So basically a high and dry site. Proposed use fits the use. There is a question on there about our parking. We put the parking associated with retail space, not storage space. As far as the drainage and the other questions he has, I think we have a little discrepancy on where we are and what he's seeing, but that can all be resolved.
That gets
with
hammered
Mike.
out at
Yeah,
the next
that's an
level.
easy fix.
Yeah.
Everything on his list is nothing insurmountable. I guess I'll answer questions because I'm not good at. Paul?
Yeah, just to continue on that point about it being an associated business, so I understand there'll be a transition over the next year or so into the newer, bigger facility.
Correct.
What happens to the facility that he's in now? Will that be vacant?
Well, I will own it at that juncture. He has the option to stay and continue to use it up until he gets his new facility up and running. He's not sure what the demographic's going to be, if it's going to support both businesses or not, both buildings or not. So the criteria is he has to rent it for 1 year. Option for later, the answer is I've got some ideas. I'd prefer not to tell you what they are, but it wouldn't stay empty long. I have some other uses I'd like to use it for down the road if he moves out.
And just one more follow-up. Would this increased space allow him also then to get rid of that permanent tent that's outside the building?
I would hope so. It's not quite permanent, but it's up a long time.
Expansion, yeah.
Yeah, it's,
we're-
trust me, I put the grass in, he put some furniture on it, then took the tent down and complained about the grass. I reseeded the grass, he put the tent back up. So, sure as unhappy about that tent as I am. I'm really unhappy about the storage containers, and that's what the new building does alleviate and gets rid of that.
Yeah, the building inspector's aware of that, so this will hopefully rectify
Right.
some of those
And again,
infractions.
he's just choked right full. He's doing an amazing business out there. He's got some really neat stuff. If you've never been in, you should go in.
Oh, yeah, it is an
very
interesting
nice.
place.
Any other questions from the board at this point? Is the new building going to be 2 floors?
Single floor, truss roof, metal top, very similar to right there in the neighborhood. The one he has now is a very high pitch roof. It's like a 10 pitch. This will only be a 4 pitch because it's such a wide. It's 80 feet wide, so it's 80 by like 125. So we're flattening the roof out, so it doesn't. I mean, it'd be up in the air 57 feet if it was a 10 pitch, but
So you're proposing a 10,000 square foot, and the existing building was how big?
3,940 square feet, just under 4,000. So 2.5 size, times that size.
Okay.
What are the dimensions, Dennis? Generally speaking of the existing building,
The
is
existing building is
40 by 10,
roughly 40
20 by
by,
20 or 40 by 10 or
yeah,
something?
it's 60 by, honest to God, I don't remember. And I should.
But it's very narrow at one
It's
point.
very, yeah, what happens is if you look at the building, it actually goes to the back and jaunts in. That's because of the state right-of-way. The state right-of-way jaunts in and out right there.
Okay.
Actually, the footprint for the existing building is about all you can put on that site legally.
Pat?
I don't see any sign on the plans. You propose a sign on the premises?
We don't at this time, because the other sign is already on the other property. So what he'll do is later, after he moves over, come back and get a sign permit at that time. And as far as, there was a dumpster question on the things from Mike too, and he takes all of his stuff to the guy out in Warren. He doesn't have a dumpster, he doesn't intend to have a dumpster, because it's so bulky. I mean, he's got, mattresses and things,
He carts it away.
so he carts it away.
All right, so at this point, we're open to a motion to
Except
accept the application as complete.
I'll make a motion.
Okay, Pat, a second by Mr. Wilson. Any discussion? All right, all those in favor of accepting the application as complete signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed would say nay. Seeing none, it is accepted as complete. Now we can, at this point, if there's nothing further that you want to add, or does your engineer want to talk about the site plan before we go to public hearing?
It's really not much to say about the site plan. It's as simple a site as it can possibly get. I've built a lot of buildings, many on Tenny Mountain Highway, and quite honestly, that's probably the easiest building site there. The drainage is, the roof drains come into to the bottom of the thing, run out to the, we are asking for open drainage. We have it berthed with trees to shield it from the highway. We put our parking on the far side, which is, most of the time people would prefer it not being on the Tenny Mountain Highway side, which stuck it on the Hamilton Way Road.
Okay.
We've given you the best look I can give you for that kind of building. We put the wraparound porch on.
Yeah, it looks nice.
The driveway, we match the driveways across from each other for easy ingress and egress off the highway. We're back far enough for stacking on the highway. The sewer system, just so you know, it anticipates, it was designed originally for the entire subdivision. I don't remember exactly the flows, but he's got one toilet, so he's not stressing it any. It can support a restaurant, so. Anything else, Mike, you can think of?
Bob?
Would you like to come up and dance? Come on.
You're gonna have an artesian well, are you?
Yes,
They're
unfortunately.
bringing the sewer out there, I would think that you get the water too. but it's too
Unfortunately,
prohibitive, or-
it's too far away. There was
I
a
see.
couple of 3 times they tried to get the water down, which
Yeah.
in my humble opinion, it ought to be all the way to the traffic circle.
Yeah.
Plymouth Water and Sewer had done some testing out behind the fields by the
Right.
river.
Yep,
Was supposed to be a secondary source, never transpired. We hit water pretty good on the first lot, and again, with the sewage system.
so
coming into
expense-wise,
town,
it's gonna be easier to
yeah,
put your own
it's
system
it's
in.
actually much less money to just give it a blow.
All right.
Thank you.
So at this point, we'll open up the public hearing at 6:45. Anyone that would like to speak in favor of the application?
Well, Frank Miller, and I'll definitely speak in favor of this application. It sounds like it's relatively simple, straight up, and it expands and moves our business facilities along Tenny Mountain Highway in the industrial commercial zone. I definitely think it's something that we should see and allow to happen, and I recommend approval.
Anyone else in favor of the application? Anyone would like to speak against the application? Anyone of a general nature?
I need to speak to something after
Okay.
the board has.
After the public hearing?
Yep.
Okay. Close the public hearing at 6:46 and bring it back to the board for discussion. Seeing none,
I just have a question about the surface drainage. Is that all ground infiltration to detention ponds?
There is infiltration and detention proposed. And there are flow arrows on the site plan that give you an idea of where the direction of the water will take. So it's easier for this relatively flat site.
You have a big
any other questions from the board? Seeing none? Yes?
Excuse me, yeah, I have one, just a comment, and that is that a number of parking spaces, we've been told by the applicant, has been adjusted to the amount of floor space that would be used for retail sales. But it seems to me like that, the amount of space used for retail sales is something which is subject to change in the future. And if it were the choice of the person operating the business to expand the retail floor space, that is there sufficient room on the site? Is there a plan such that parking spaces can be added to be proportional to the new, or to the additional retail space.
There's plenty of space to add parking.
I need to speak to that, too. We need to back it up a little bit to Paul's point. The parking is calculated on a retail sale usage, which is 1 space per 250 square feet of the gross finished area, which is 10,000 square feet.
That's
So the
25 spaces. How many spaces do we have? I'm just going off what might be now the road. I thought we had
Yeah.
talked at one point about.
Oh, I need that issue too. I'm just, count here.
Showing 29 on here.
Yeah, it's not 25, because I did the math. Oh, you got it, yeah.
It's stated in... May I?
Certainly, go ahead.
If it would be helpful?
Yes, please.
Go ahead, Paul. I thought I read it somewhere.
Proposed parking lot has spaces proposed, well, there is the issue of spaces within 15 feet of a public way, which is not permitted. So setting aside that one, and focusing on the second sentence of the first paragraph, it said also, parking is required at a rate of 1 space per 250 square feet of gross building area, which based on a 10,000 square foot building would require 40 spaces, but only 25 are provided.
It's actually 28.
What's that?
It's 28 when you count them.
Still,
Well, which version are we've got a couple sets
I
of
don't know, the
plans
one you
here,
sent
so
me.
I guess we should ask the question, the most current set of plans is, okay, let's see, what do we got?
There's a new revision.
I think you'll find we calculated on retail space, and then somewhere in there you'll find something for warehouse or something other than that, no?
28 is right, okay. No, maybe I didn't clear the calculator. No, warehouse, we have in the table, the quantity in the table of uses in zoning on page 30, it just speaks to retail, so.
At the present proposal, there's 28 spaces proposed, and that's based upon 7,000 square foot of retail space. So your question, if that remaining storage ever went into retail, then there would not be enough spaces to meet the current regulations. So then an additional area, it would be somewhat removed from the site, would be away from the Tenny Mountain Highway side of the site. But there is an area there, it's probably, I would guess 60 by 150.
Yeah.
That is not proposed for development, any development right now, so that
So
would
there is parking lot expansion area then,
Well,
if it was necessary.
Right, but
potentially.
you can't go over 75% impervious surface coverage. And it looked, I think, and because I didn't have a big sheet, it was really small, but it looks like this was 41% coverage, does that ring a bell?
41% coverage.
As it stands now. And I guess I didn't realize, the information I didn't have heretofore with the planner report was that only 7,000 square feet of this 10,000 square foot building would be used for retail at this point in time. So that makes a big difference with the information I was handed from your narrative, those specifics. You know, if that's what it is, that's fine, but we didn't know that at the time, so.
I told you where I was actually golfing when I wrote that narrative, sorry.
I don't want to hear that, Dennis, I don't want to hear that.
Good one. That was my birthday. Yeah, I know I'm old now, I got an AARP card the other day.
so was that your plan, knowing what you had for space on the lot, and break it down to a 70% retail, 30% storage, so that you would meet the requirements for
No, it
parking?
wasn't actually to meet requirements, that was his original intent, was to have 3,000 square feet of space. We could put more parking in the back,
Well,
but it's not really useful for that particular business. Actually, he's got way more than he needs today.
Okay, we're just going to have to make sure that, you know, because this is in motion, that it does meet the zoning requirement, and I think it can, but otherwise it's a ZBA trip, so we want to make really sure that we're all on the same page with exactly, you know, what the formula is going to be regarding the actual use as built.
How is the separation between the storage and retail? Is there
Demising wall,
a what?
a demising wall, there's a wall with a door to in back.
Could you possibly And not from the golf course? You never should have told me that. Could you possibly, this narrative that you sent in to me before, can you update that, please, just so that we have accurate information moving forward? I mean, it's just another, just change a paragraph. Because otherwise it looks like the board's not doing their due diligence because it's based on
Separate it in for
7 and 3
absolutely.
thousand. Okay, thanks.
All right. So we've got our engineering report here with some concerns that, from what Ms. Penny talked about, that could be hammered out in the next phase after it gets through the planning board. So how do we want to word a motion at this point?
We could give them a conditional approval.
A conditional approval?
You're not obliged to. I always have to say that. You don't have to feel like you have to jump. But if you feel comfortable with what Mike has recommended. Because there's simple contingencies, but there are also 2 pages, so I'm just saying.
Yeah, I could just point out that, once again, with the parking spaces, I think we understand better about the usage of the building, that it's just 70% of it is going to be retail space, so we understand that. But the town engineer is saying that has spaces within 15 feet of a public way, so it looks like, on the face of it, that some parking is going to have to be moved to satisfy that requirement.
Looks like you lose 2 of them, maybe.
I beg your pardon?
So you might lose 2 of them.
Spaces.
2 spaces.
Mm-hmm.
Just looking
Now,
at
is it
the
15 foot from the right-of-way or from the actual travel lane?
from Hamilton Way, I think.
the travel, okay? Not for easement.
I think it has to be outside the edge of the right-of-way.
Yeah, right.
We are just outside of the edge of the right-of-way. You can see there's a spot contour 510. Right next to where it says snow storage, you can see.
I'm sorry, would you mind going to the mic, just because
Oh,
it won't come through in the minutes very well,
okay.
if you don't mind, and then you can do phone call. Do you guys need to look at bigger?
Is this better than the one I have?
Yeah, it might be. But if you look right here in this corner, this has to be what he's talking about, and I think he got the
dotted line.
grade line wrong when he was looking at the print. That line right there with the dotted line, that dotted line is the edge of the right of way. This line is a dimension line.
Oh,
So I
okay.
think, when he was looking at it,
What is it, a
When you say
50-foot
dotted
right-of-way?
line,
see this? See that
50-foot
line with
right
the
away?
dots?
I believe so.
That's the edge of the
okay,
right
dash
of way.
dot, dash dot,
From the
that line
center
is the
it was
right.
25.
I don't know, 50 something.
Right,
I don't have my glasses on.
I mean,
That's the one
I don't
that
have a
runs into
scale
the edge of the-
ruler, so
right.
I don't know.
I don't know if this is the scale.
That's not the scale.
Yeah.
Can't scale off the copy, yeah.
There comes the edge.
Don't scale this drawing.
So I don't have the scale with me either, but I could say that the parking, the closest parking lot is outside of the right-of-way. It's not within the right-of-way. So we'd have to look at that in a little more detail.
But 15 feet from the right-of-way, is that,
Oh, that doesn't
that's
say,
the
Well,
concern?
I don't know, it's
The
public.
language, and this is what happens when you have vagaries. Designated parking spaces or parking facilities may not be within 15 feet of a public street and property line.
Not the right of way.
Yeah.
Does not address right-of-way. It does not address a private road. Of course, it's a safety issue in terms of access to the travelway, so I think we're going to have to duke that out.
What's your scale on
It's 40.
20 scale.
That's
I mean,
total.
We're at least 10 or 12 feet from any travelway, even entryway.
Well, as I said, I mean, that'll be something to refine with the town's engineer, because, you know, as we all know, there's standard safety operating practices, blah, 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 but Hamilton Way is a private street. However, you don't want people backing into each other. Right, so, and this language is everything, and nuance is everything. But this does not specifically say right-of-way, nor does it say private road, but there are some basic common sense things there that,
It does say property line though, doesn't it?
it says property line.
So in other words, that's
Or-
saying that there has to be a 15-foot offset between the property line and the closest parking?
No, that's not what it says. It says 15 feet above
You-
public way.
And property line.
Oh, and property line.
It's the 411.3.
411.3B.
I can pass it down if anybody wants to look at it.
Yeah, I like that.
Has that changed in the recent past?
Not this particular
We interpreted it different on the lot across the street, I believe. Because I think if you look back at the old print that we did for the first building, we are right on the edge of the right-of-way.
Well, that shows up on here, and again, I know in my
Well,
scale, but
state-
it would look like 10
but you-
feet or 8 to 10 feet.
Which right-of-way? Your,
That was Hamilton Way right-of-way.
yeah, I don't know, I'd have to look at the file. I wasn't
That's
here
what I
then,
was
so.
always under the assumption, as long as it was outside the right-of-way, you could be right up to the edge of the right-of-way.
It says parking facilities in certain zones, multifamily and civic institutional. This is,
Agriculture.
no, it's ICD,
It's highway
isn't it?
commercial, isn't it?
ICD, that's
It's
right.
ICD, yeah. It's permitted within 5 feet of a property line if you get a special exception from the ZBA. So maybe that was the case, I don't know, I didn't look to that.
Okay, that's okay. Work for it.
Yeah, but those are the things that,
Have enough parking. Have enough parking.
Wow.
Any other questions?
Could you reconfigure this so that it's 5 feet from the right-of-way line?
5 or 15.
5.
5 if we get a special exception.
no, that only applies to another zone.
Okay, so in our zone, we have to be 5 feet, and we don't need an exception for that, or?
No, 15, but the question is, because the language says may not be within 15 feet, this is the general guidance in the zoning from 411.3, may not be within 15 feet of a public street.
Or
So it's-
property line.
Or property line, right, so,
So we need to be 15 feet from the property line with all our parking, is that?
They could get a variance, though.
well, that's what I'm trying to ascertain here with the parking, because you could give a conditional approval based on a trip to a ZBA, but in my mind, if you have to front-load stuff so much with that kind of stuff, you shouldn't be given a conditional approval.
They have a hardship, though, on their lot.
Well, that would be 9 spaces. I don't believe any of those spaces along the Hamilton Way would meet that requirement of 15 feet from the property line.
Yeah, can't.
You don't think so?
Even the one on the, what's my north arrow? Even the one on the north side, which is the Tenny Mountain side, that looks like it's pretty close to being that 15 feet but essentially it's the southernmost parking spot where it says it's close to the entrance, closest to the entrance, that is right at the property line.
Right.
A foot or two away from it, maybe, or right on it. The corner.
It's 6 inches or so away from it. For all practical purposes, it's right up to the property line. And so then traveling towards the Tenny Mountain Highway, we get further from the property line, but I don't know if we quite get the 15 feet, or if you look, a parking spot is 20 feet approximately, so you can see where we're probably within 10, 12 feet of the property line.
How wide is Hamilton Way, the right-of-way?
I believe it's 50 feet.
Oh, all right.
So that would eliminate those 9 spaces right there. And it would potentially push parking, I'm not sure where we would go with it, but much further away from the store, certainly.
Well, as I said, those are the things that the board can entrust to the town's engineer and myself to make sure they're kosher, working with these folks, or if you want to see another iteration, then that's your prerogative.
I mean, at the point where they're conceivably in the future want the town to take over Hamilton Way, that's where it would be
That's
more
where
of an
it'd be
issue.
problematic, yes.
Right.
So it's in their best interest to change it or go with it and,
No, in our best interest is to make it fit on the lot that makes sense. If you have the topography of the land, it's an upgrading away from Hamilton Way. So it's not like you're gonna plow into somebody parked there. You're not gonna throw snow up on a hood of a car. You're not gonna hit anybody. You'd have to go up the hill to get to them. So I guess my preference would be to leave alone if it can get by with being a private road.
Well, we'll have to figure that, we'll have to.
My point is, I don't particularly care to go to the ZBA if I don't have to, because I don't have time.
Well, that's.
I understand. But I'm saying, like, I just gave you my opinion.
Yeah, that's not a criteria.
but that's kind of his decision, since it's a private road, on whether he wants to fight that battle down the road or now. I think he's
Well,
making his choice.
I never had any intention of having the town take over the road myself.
So I guess we need a little help in the determination of does that regulation apply to a private road or not?
Well,
And
we're
if it
gonna-
does, then we need to do something, and if it doesn't, then maybe at your discretion, safety-wise, you determine it would be
We'd
acceptable.
have to speak, I'll have to speak with Mike and Brian Murphy, the zoning officer, code enforcement officer, just to, hash this out, because I did notice that when I looked at the zoning technically, but, what's been the longstanding policy on interpretation of, it doesn't say public way, it says public street. So we've got to determine if that means town municipal street. What exactly does that?
But it's also said property lines as well.
And, well, of course, the property line, but, yeah, so we're gonna have to look at that. Which could be a contingency, and I'm not,
And I can see a property line being an issue if he's abutted someone else's property and he's got cars right up onto someone's property, but it's not, it's right away that he owns.
He owns the road and he owns the lots.
And if we're gonna, yeah, John?
In whatever we do tonight, the way it is now and not something it might be in the future, so it's the private road now, we are approving this project as of now. If the town took the road over 10 years from now, then undoubtedly he would be grandfathered in. It'd be the same idea as a lot of your old dirt roads. They can't infringe on people's property unless it's through eminent domain. So you've got to think of the project as it is right now and not as it is if the town took it over.
The fact that it's not up against someone else's property makes it a little bit easier for me. And if we can do something to
It's a private road, too.
private road, so.
I don't know if the intent of that was the roadway, and then when they said property line, that meant the rest of the property that wasn't abutting on the road,
that's
or...
why I hate big zoning ordinances, because they open themselves to.
I think that was one of your pet peeves when you showed up here, wasn't it, Sharon? To try to fix some of the language in the...
Yeah, there's also paragraph 10 in Mike Vignali's letter that we haven't talked about yet. And I just say, as kind of an overarching statement about all of this, is that the thing that makes this difficult is that we got the engineer's report just as we walked in tonight. So we're seeing issues for the first time, and apparently the applicant is seeing these issues for the first time
Right.
also. It seems like, well, to my mind, can't speak for anybody else, but it looks like a really good project, but it seems like there are a couple of big open questions that need to be answered.
I mean, this is pretty similar to the approval, the conditional approval we gave for the dental hygienist, and it seems like things are being worked out on that end, and
They are, it's taken a while, so, I mean, and all I'm saying is, I mean, it's, my professional, what I'm supposed to do to you folks is not let you go over a cliff, so to speak, in terms of rushing something through or not rushing it through, or, you know, the most appropriate measure going forward. There are some issues, I think they can be readily rectified, but the offset of having a one-shot hearing on a development with a lot of conditional approvals is that it may take some time, which will slow them up anyway, with the back and forth with the engineer. So I think, my impression is this will take a bit of time anyway. I'm not saying
Right.
6 weeks, but the conditional approval with the hashing out back and forth is going to take a couple of weeks with the town's engineer.
Most of them do anyways.
Well, yeah, they do. I mean, it's either end of it. You're going to get it either on the front end or you're going to get it on the back end.
I mean, we had, yes, Dennis.
I've worked with Mike McNally numerous times on numerous projects, and we've had our issues, no doubt, but we've always worked through them. So I'm sure we can get through this one, you know, much quicker than waiting for another meeting.
Now, are you saying you're looking at starting construction before winter, you said?
That's the goal.
Okay. And, I mean, we've had applicants here saying they need their approval that night because of financing, otherwise the rates are gonna go up, and I wanna make sure that we can try and...
That's the balance thing.
I mean, it's not, I mean, the issue, of course, you know, I mean, I can dig in January, but it's awful expensive and it's not as much fun as digging in November. So, again, this isn't a Home Depot or Lowe's sign site. You know, it's a small site with, you know, obviously a few issues, but nothing insurmountable. Obviously, you know, we got the information the same time you did, so we didn't have time to address it, but...
Well, that's a normal procedure. I actually fast-tracked this because Mike ordinarily looks at this after the planning
Right,
board has
that's
made a
right.
ruling. So I did fast-track it
Okay.
for free, so you need to give me a check.
I'll get you a check.
So is there a motion from the board at this point?
I just have one more comment.
Yes.
It looks like the building across the street's not 15 feet from the property line either, the parking. So, right?
That's correct.
Yeah, so, I mean, it's,
I have a question for Michael.
Yes, Neil.
The boulder wall, you're a PE, right?
I am.
And are you doing the structural design of the wall?
We have a very robust detail that we require for the boulder walls because they're inherently more a function of who's building the wall.
You're putting your stamp on it, right?
What's that?
You're putting your stamp on it, on the wall?
Actually, a different engineer did stamp.
Somebody's
plans,
stamping.
But that's our standard boulder
Yeah.
wall detail, and, you know, we've used that on hundreds of
Okay.
projects. There is about a 6-foot exposure, I believe that's what Mike had in there. So that, we do require that there's a big base underneath the wall too. So it's essentially a gravity wall, and just the mass of the thing is what,
It has a cant to it?
yes. But basically, it's called a mass wall, that just the sheer weight of it keeps it from sliding or overtopping, just the bulk of it.
Thanks.
But again, boulder walls are very dependent on the operator that's putting the
Yeah.
the wall together, whether or not it's structurally sound, which is why we don't like to go too tall with them. But they're everywhere around here.
It's all part of your plan?
Yes, there's a detail probably on sheet before last or so.
sheet
I'll
5,
show that boulder wall detail.
sheet 5 there.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah, I don't
It's not very tall.
know.
It's only 6, 7 feet out of the ground.
Well, I was just concerned that
There's
it,
not a ton of pressure above it. And there's really not a lot of
yeah.
soil. It's not a sheer cliff above it.
It's probably only, I'm looking at the grading going into it, it's probably at its highest point. The highest point of the wall is going to be into the site, so that the comment about being, you see how the wall tapers around and it curves into the site? So where it's along the property line, it's probably only 2 to 3 feet
Yeah.
high there. And then it is taller coming into the site, so there's going to be room to work behind it and to build that. So we'll be able to answer that comment on that there is room to physically build this.
Thanks.
And then if you look at that detail, proportionally, the base of the wall is in proportion to the height. So if it's only 2 feet high, then we don't make them go 4 feet into the ground with it, they go 2 feet into the ground. So there's room to construct that wall.
Mr. Chairman, could I ask a question?
Yes.
Also, I just wanted to return to that item number 10 in Mike Vignali's report. So I made a sweeping statement about getting this at the 11th hour, but I just wanted to return to that point where he talks about the retaining wall at the corner of the building near the loading dock. Said the wall is located next to the abutting property line. It requires the bottom of the wall to be 4 feet below grade and has about 6 foot high exposed face, results in an overall wall height of 10 feet. Considering this wall is located very close to the abutting property line and is a large wall in height and width, provide additional detail. So do you have any comment about that?
Again, along the property line, the wall is going to be yay high. It will be taller coming into the site. You can see the grade lines going into it. That's the steepest end of it. So I don't see any issues with the constructability of that wall. I don't see that there's
About the constructability, but he goes on in the paragraph to say, provide detail to ensure that the wall can be constructed without impacts to the abutting property on the property line. So there
So
will
what we
be...
could do is we could provide information that at the very tip of the wall, which is closest to Tenny Mountain Highway, how tall is the wall there? How deep into the ground? So we can kind of go along that wall as it curves into the site and tell you that it's 2 feet high here, and then 20 feet later it's 4 feet high. And then at the very tip of it is where it's the highest, and that's where it potentially is 6 feet high.
Right, but you're saying that it can all be constructed without any impact on the abutting property?
Yes.
You build it across where it's near the wall. You would build the wall as if it was standing in front of you and working back. When the wall gets deeper, you'll move up behind the wall and build it backwards. So the shallow wall, you dig a trench, put the rock in,
Right.
put a rock behind it, move back, do the same thing. And then when you can get up behind the wall, you can stack it up to the 6 feet. So you never be on the property of next door.
Okay, so when you say behind the wall, you mean on the abutter's side?
No, because of the curve of the property,
Oh, okay.
once you, there's only, like you were saying earlier, there's only a couple of stones that you'd be near the wall at all. And once you got beyond that, you would have to move up behind it and do the work. You don't have to be behind the wall to build a wall. I can actually build a wall from the front if I have to.
Which is what CDS did, right?
So if it was very tall right at the property line, then that would be more difficult to not encroach on the property.
Right.
But because it's short at the property line and it gets taller as you go into the property, there's plenty of room to work around that.
Thank you.
Right.
Yes.
The wall will run with the grade of the land, won't it?
Yeah, if you looked at...
It's not going to be 10 feet across, that's
No,
what
no, it's going to be a
people,
little pyramid.
it's going to be, you know,
Like a little pyramid. in the back.
yeah, with the grade.
Smaller. There's one section in the back right corner of the building area, that's the highest, which is still only as tall as mine, out of the ground. I mean, it's not the wall.
Massive wall, it's running with the grade of the land, whatever, yeah. I don't see anything wrong with that, with whatever, so. Do we still have a motion on the floor? or-
There is no motion on the floor.
I thought there was, yeah,
No.
he mentioned.
To accept it, but not approve it.
So we got a couple issues here. The wall, I don't see as much of an issue as the parking, but we're trying to follow the letter of the law. And the town engineer has, again, we got this probably before we, being that Mike is very, very helpful to the planning board, we got it earlier than what we might have, and probably given the approval, and then would have had to have worked this out after. What's the pleasure of the board at this point? Bob?
Most of these applications, as we read all the literature that's provided by the town planner here, says this is a viable application. And we always seem to have contingencies. I think that's something that just part of the procedure. So, a conditional approval with the idea that the Vignali's comments and those issues are resolved. It's like any other application we process, we should go forward with it. That's my opinion.
I'd like to give him an approval, subject to meeting the requirements of the issues that we're concerned about.
I go along with that.
Okay.
I'd like to suggest that the board takes a moment, either before or after their vote, to get specific conditions of approval articulated.
And as I understand it, the town engineer has the ability to ask for certain things from the applicant after they've gotten their conditional approval that he has the authority to ask for, because the applicant cannot get a building permit
Right.
That's right.
Unless the zoning
Without
is satisfied.
satisfying the town
Exactly.
engineer.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I feel comfortable
Sure.
with the sentiment that the board has at this point.
Okay, I just have one question relative to that. So I agree with most everything that's been said, but is the town engineer the best person to interpret our zoning regulations with regard to setbacks?
No. Where this goes at this point, and this is the quid pro quo, if you will, for a bit of a blanket approval, is I work directly with Mike and then bring in Brian Murphy wearing his two hats, which are building inspector and code enforcement official,
Right.
to make sure that this is all articulated. Now, that, of course, can be the board's pleasure too, the particulars, but that's where the rubber meets the road, because the give and take, if you will, for a conditional, somewhat front-loaded approval like this is that the zoning will be satisfied. That's what you folks are saying in this. So it's not just, oh, well, the zoning is kind of, sort of. No, the zoning will be satisfied, such as the parking, number of parking spaces, the particulars of figuring out the language based on historic precedents, and that comes down to Brian and me. And when you've got vague language like that.
Right, and I think that's part of it, is that the language is vague, and if it were more
I mean, that is-
specific, we'd have more to hang our hat on.
Right.
We don't have, we don't have, it's not specific.
Although it's the board's prerogative to debate too, but I mean, that's where you have us do our job, so it's certainly up to you. But
Would it be fair to ask you, as a town planner here tonight, does this conform to zoning? Does the setback?
generally speaking, it does, but the caveat is that it will conform to zoning, so they may have to do a little bit of shuffling with parking spaces, but that's a conversation either you can empower myself, Brian, and the town's engineer to have, or you can postpone this and have us get back to you at another point. Now, of course, I will get back to you anyway on this, but, as I said, there are a few conditions of approval, maintenance, drainage, dumpster, okay, dumpster says it's going somewhere, okay, so
Yep.
I'll need that verbatim. I need these things articulated and clear in the notice of decision, which will get filed at the registry. But that's where you get the enforcement, if you will. Pardon?
The meat on the bone.
Yeah.
May I ask
Yes.
Dennis a question? You have a copy of this Vignali's,
Yes, he does.
and you're comfortable with it?
Yeah, like I said earlier,
A few issues you've got to
we can
resolve.
work through anything.
Yeah.
What you guys are gonna decide is it, does it meet the general criteria of what you want to see on Main Line Highway? Does it fit the use of the land? Is it appropriate?
Right.
And then the rest of the stuff is, I mean, if you guys want to come back and bore you some more, we certainly can, but again, I would prefer a quicker route, which I think Mike, Sharon, and I can get through much quicker.
Can we have a motion from the board?
I make a motion, we approve this conditionally. And as far as the lettering goes, use Mike's letter. That these would be conditions that need to be met.
And
A second?
a second by Mr. Dragon. So, the engineer's report would need to be hammered out between the engineer, the planner, and the applicant, and with priority given to the stone wall and the parking issue.
And I also want some sort of assurance on maintenance on drainage. I mean, it may seem normal, but I mean, there'll be some language somewhere.
We put it on print, make you happy.
It will make me very happy, because the notice of decision will cite that, and that goes to the registry. And that's just in perpetuity. If you sell it, someone else doesn't get left holding the bag, the town doesn't get left holding the bag, let's say theoretically, and we have to plan, the board plans for contingencies. You know, if there's a drainage issue because it's not, something's, a catch basin's not maintained, and then you get ice buildup adjacent to Tenny Mountain. I'm not saying, I'm not casting aspersions, it's just these are the criteria.
And many towns in
Karen, do you have some standard language that you, from another project, you'd like the boards to be nice at? You just put
Not
this
so
on?
much, we usually get it from the engineer.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, flow, maintain, blah, 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 that's something perhaps we can hammer out with Mike, but I mean, that's usually a standard maintenance document,
have
if you
one.
will.
Maybe you'll share it with us.
Annual maintenance.
Whatever's appropriate, but just the fact that it will be looked at and kept in proper running order before it becomes an issue, theoretically, if it could become an issue for the town. I mean, that's pretty SOP, even if it's just boilerplate language. So, yeah, if you could add something to your detail, perhaps, and then I'll
Do you
include.
want to, do you record the whole set or just the site plan?
No, the site plan, but my notice of decision is correlated, or the board's notice of decision, and that's where you get the specifics, such as I will mention, case in point number 5, Mike has asked for dumpster locations. Dumpster locations are not applicable because all refuse shall be carried away off-site. So if there's refuse piling up, let's just say theoretically, the notice of decision allows Brian Murphy to come in as building inspector and say,
Right, get it out.
So it's just, you know, it's the covering all the bases thing. So,
Any other discussion?
Yeah.
Yes.
Just one reminder about conformance to zoning. I've heard some conversation about saying, well, the building that's across the street, that's on that same development, may not conform to zoning. And I just wanted to remind the board that, legal counsel has advised us in the past that if a mistake was made in approval of a project in the past, it doesn't oblige us to follow that precedent if we believe.
two wrongs making a right.
Right. So I just wanted to say that as a reminder. I think it's a good project, but I think there's a lot of questions that need to be answered. Yeah.
Seeing no further discussion, the vote will be to approve the application with the condition that the applicant would hammer out the details with the town engineer and giving,
And the town planner.
the town planner with attention specifically, in addition or extra attention to the wall, the parking, and management of the drainage,
Right.
and all other boilerplate conditions with state and federal approvals.
Right, yeah.
All those in favor of approving the application with those conditions signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed would say nay. Seeing none, the application has been approved
With conditions.
with conditions.
I don't think I've ever walked through that.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dennis. All right, that brings us to item number 5, correspondence.
I have a letter here, just FYI, that's the copy that you had, Mike. It's come to Paul Freitas, but it was distributed to me to distribute to you folks. It's from Plymouth Village Water and Sewer District. As you know, we here at the town hall have a very effective working relationship with Dana Hadley, who's the district administrator. He keeps us informed, we keep him informed. I just got a set of plans today. I guess they're on the floor if anybody wants to look at them. But Water and Sewer has been working to move forward to replace the sewer force main out at Highland Street in the vicinity of Burger King. They've had some issues with pipes deteriorating and breaks and stuff. So this just is communication to the board about what's going on out there. They're being proactive to try to bring some of that infrastructure up to spec and hopefully prohibit any more breaks, because we are getting development out there, so it's important to keep the water running. But I do have the plans if anybody, they just showed up today. I think Brian got a set from Dana because he stops by quite a bit. So if anyone at another time wants to look at these, I've just gotten them, but if anyone has a engineering purview, they're welcome to take a gander.
All right, that brings us to item, anything else on correspondence?
Nope.
Okay, that brings us to item number 6, presentation by Max Stamp of the update to the Plymouth River Corridor Plan. So I see Max is here.
We have a guest this evening. The executive summary that I passed out a couple meetings ago was taken from the Pemigewasset River Corridor Management Plan, which was updated this last year. I know John Kelly worked on that with that. I do have copies in the office and in hand, if anyone wants to borrow them and get them back to me. But it's interesting reading. Sure.
For the evening, I'll give it
Sure.
back to you.
Max, if you'd like to come up and speak.
I did bring one copy. We're a low-budget operation.
Thank you.
That's it for the town. And a CD. I don't know where that would
I'll
be
take that, thank you very
eventually.
much.
Nice
Probably
picture,
with Sharon. Thanks for agreeing to give me some time. We'll pass 7:30. Hopefully you can get home and see the Red Sox. And I have a handout that will follow. I'll try and follow. And I'm one short on the handouts. I guessed wrong on that, so somebody will have
Like,
to
well, I'll make a
have to
quick
share it.
copy.
Oh, we can share.
All right, okay.
It's not that complicated. I thought it would be good to
No.
start out because not everybody is familiar with some of our activities, and just briefly give you a little background on some of our ongoing activities specifically, and hopefully that'll allow you to kind of see where we're going with this plan. And it's all generally, major emphasis, of course, is on water quality and quantity. If you look at the first page, that's our water test schedule for this year, 2013. And you can see we have 2 teams, and we go from Thornton down to Hill, 10 sites. And in the middle, you see a lot of lab testing that we also get involved with. E. coli, phosphorus. New this year is nitrogen and chloride, and sodium is related to that. So you can expect, I think, down the road to hear quite a bit more about those last 2, particularly chloride, salt in the water, in the drinking water. It's bubbling up, and it is going to be a problem, particularly for towns situated as Plymouth is along major highways. This is the 12th year we've been doing this. If I go back far enough, Mike was involved. And we created our first plan. A couple of the major issues were, one, we couldn't find out anywhere in the state where they had a decent reading on PEMI water quality. We looked and looked, and we got printouts and all the information we could. We could find where Woodstock was one site that occasionally apparently got some testing done up there. So fast forward from 2001 to where we are now, and you can see that our 2001 plan, which one of the major objectives of it was testing the water in a PEMI and getting a good solid database, we pretty much, I think, accomplished that. 10 sites, you can read what they are. It's probably not much more to cover on that. We have our own test equipment acquired back in, I think, 2004 with grants from some banks. And so we're pretty much self-sufficient on that. We're out bi-weekly, every other week, doing the testing. Next page, second page, some samples of water test feedback. Unfortunately, this is 2012. I tried really hard to get our 2013 data to show you tonight. I couldn't get it out of DES, but it'll be coming shortly, and when I get a copy, I'll make sure I include Sharon in. You know, yes?
Excuse me, just a question about technique. How big a sample, when you pull a water sample, how big a sample is it?
It's, everything starts with a bucket, 5-gallon bucket of water.
Let's see.
And
5 gallon, you said?
yeah, approximately. And if you ever see us out here in Plymouth, we're on the 175 bridge. Most of us are getting up in years. We have a hell of a time getting that thing up to the top of the bridge. Keep raising the bridge every year, I think. That's where it starts. And we take the bucket back to the back of a pickup, get the instruments out, and start the measurement process. So the PEMI is a Class B river, and with Class B rivers, certain standards are required for the various things we look at. And you can just go across the top of the Thornton data for 2012. See date, time, dissolved oxygen in milligrams per liter. Dissolved oxygen as percent saturation. You see pH, turbidity, conductance, water temperature. And then if we do E. coli at that site, you will see some E. coli data. Where you see blue, we're violating the standard. In general, you'll see that the river runs on the acidic side. It's always been like this for the 10 years we've been doing this. We get close, but we don't quite get there. This is not deemed a major problem today by anybody that we work with, but we're not sure what we can do about it either.
Is the pH increasing?
I would say no.
No.
It's kind of hanging in there pretty close. And what we hear, and I don't want to get too far off in the weeds here, from people that are in this business, is that maybe this problem started back when we had serious acid rain problems, and it ate up some of the alkali or whatever in the soils and so forth, and now we don't have much of an offset to whatever comes through precip. So there are all the sites, and you can look at those as you desire. All of this data, field data sheets, go into DES bi-weekly. They're all handwritten. They accumulated in their database, all these things. And so now the PEMI's got a pretty solid database to spot something that maybe goes astray, and we might pick it up earlier than we would otherwise by watching everything that's going on here. The data that DES gets eventually every other year goes to satisfy the requirements of the Clean Water Act. Goes to EPA, and the state is required to actually submit a fair amount of data on the overall health of its surface water. So in that sense, we're providing some data that the state does use to meet their requirements. We're all volunteers. We've got about 8 to 10 people. That varies up and down. 13 segments of the river are currently listed as impaired, but as you can see, quite a few of those are in the pH arena. But we also have a dissolved oxygen problem down in the impoundment area of Ayers Island Dam. And that's another one that's not very easy to deal with, but it has something to do with the fact that the river isn't doing much churning down there. It's pretty much settled. So we're now on, I think, the third page of the handout, where we're talking about what is a corridor management plan. We're now into the word section of this thing. In the box on the left, that's kind of the boilerplate that establishes our existence. It's the Rivers Management and Protection Program, RSA 483, that essentially said that designated, you have to be nominated and approved by the state to become a designated river. For us, that happened in 1992. And as part of the responsibility for being a designated river, you have to come up with a management plan. And the management plan deals with land-related, pretty much land-related issues as they possibly might affect the river. The state is responsible for maintaining in-stream flows. They have to manage that, and they call upon corridor communities to give us members into the local advisory committee, the PEMI Local Advisory Committee, so that we have members from virtually all the towns on our committee, with the possible exception of one currently.
You don't have any members from Plymouth?
You got John Kelly.
John Kelly?
There are 20 LACs operating in the state as I speak, so we're one of 20. The plan that you're able to look at least some segments of it, the plan is essentially to the river what a master plan is to the town. It's a guide for us to follow longer term. It talks in terms of kind of where we are today, where we'd like to get in 10 years in terms of quality, quantity of our water, what are the obstacles, and what can we do to gradually overcome the obstacles. So that's the purpose of the plan. It is, we use it, and we try and develop our primary objectives from it. The reason for the update from the 2001 plan is the 2001 plan no longer reflected the reality of what's taken place along the river. 10 years, a lot of things happen. Zoning laws change, state laws change, more people, population increases. We did finally get the PEMI included in the Comprehensive Shoreline Protection Act in 2008. That was a major change. So we just reached the point where we had to make this thing kind of reflect the world we live in right now. And we think, hopefully, we've accomplished that. The structure of the plan, I'm still on number 1 there on the words page. The structure of the plan, which is item D, kind of gives you the layout of the way we've organized the plan. 1, 2, 3, 4. What are the key elements of what goes on in each of those? Item number 3, major concerns. And that's a summary, really, of the major concerns. And I'll fill you in a little bit on how we arrived at kind of the place we did, but that also is kind of a, if you were to go into that section of the plan, these are the things you would see. And I guess the purpose of the handout, at least what my thinking was, is you've got a copy of this, you can kind of look down through it, and hopefully you'll spot something that might pique your interest and want to dig into it a little further, in which case get the CD or dig out the plan and go for it. The last page, recommendations, and it mentions here that in all, in our plan, there were 69. I tried very hard to narrow that down into priorities and get it down to 10, 15 that we could work on and be more comfortable with, but the group said, no, let's hold on to all of them. We'll review them on a periodic basis and see if anything ought to move to the top that isn't there now. So that gets a little untenable, but that's where we are. And on the last page, item 4, recommendations. I think the two that I would focus in on are A and B. We know as a group that we've got to do a better job of outreach and communicating with corridor communities and so forth, and probably a much better job of communicating with planning boards than we've been doing. So we'll take that one on, and we'll be back when we've got something that I think you would be of interest in or could certainly be a part of. The next item that bubbled up to the top is stormwater management. That's, I don't think, anything new to this group, but we've got to promote steps which will increase the capture and infiltration of runoff. And just to give you a little background on how we got there, we've been at building this plan. Given that we're a volunteer group, things go slow. We've been building the plan for probably almost a year and a half. And during that time, we've looked at a lot of things that have been going on around the state. Commissions, there's been a Shoreline Protection Study Commission. We were very much involved with that. There's been a Stormwater Commission. Their output was 2010 or 2011. They had some very specific recommendations that I'm sure some of you have run across in your travels, such things as possibly creating a stormwater utility and getting much more involved on a local basis with runoff issues and so forth. We were influenced also by a study that the U.S. Forest Service did called Forests on the Edge. And some facts that I was not aware of: 56% of American forests are privately owned. A large portion of those are in the east, 75%, which I didn't know. And the Forest Service went through and looked at 15 major watersheds. And their concern was how across the country housing density changes may impact their ability to filter our water, their being private forests and the eco services that we get from the private forests today. And they listed 15 most likely to experience changes in water quality as a result of increases in housing density. 3 of the top 4 were in New Hampshire. The closest one to us and one we're a part of, watershed, is the Merrimack. So we're essentially in this concern category, which again served to help us, I think, boost the concern about the whole stormwater issue. Population increased in New Hampshire, 80,000 people from 2000 to 2010. That has certainly slowed down. In fact, it's probably flat now, if anything. But I don't think it's going to stay flat. New Hampshire's got too much to offer. So we expect that to pick back up, probably not to where it was during those premium years, but there will be more people, and there will be more water requirements and so forth. So the other part of this thing that causes us to focus on stormwater is that 80% of the impaired water in the state is due primarily to stormwater runoff. It's the big gorilla now in terms of water quality, and this is not confined to New Hampshire. This is across the country. So it's got to be a problem that we begin to push on a little bit. And some people did back of the envelope numbers, 1 acre of impervious surface, and I'm talking about, we spent an hour here talking about development just before I got up. 1 acre of impervious surface will expel 300,000 to 500,000 gallons of water in 1 year if it goes directly into a stream and basically into a river. So all of this cumulatively says this is one we've got to start to look at. The things that we do have in our quiver right now is the Shoreline Protection Act. We've got some buffers along our surface water. That's a major help. There is the alteration of terrain law on the part of the state, but that gets you up to pretty large, major, 100,000 square feet kind of issues before that kicks in and starts providing some incentives to collect the water that's going to run off from those impervious surfaces. So this leaves, and it's probably going to vary a lot by town, this leaves an expanse of area out there that really doesn't have much in the way of requirements to attempt to capture and infiltrate water coming off, and I'm talking basically new development. I think that's where our focus, we see our focus in the next year, working with planning boards, is to focus on new development regardless of parcel size or where it is in the watershed, and speak in terms of, okay, you're going in and disturb quite often unaltered land, forest, et cetera, et cetera. What are you going to do as part of your overall scheme of things to not let any more water come off your parcel than was coming off before you developed it? And that gets into very serious problem areas. I know it's probably not greeted too favorably with people that have to do your kind of work, but I think we've got to take a position, and we've got to start taking it now to not lose any more ground on getting stormwater managed better than we do it today. Nothing good comes from stormwater that I can see. If we don't capture it and use it to recharge our groundwater supply, it will be in Newburyport in a few days, and off it goes, and it's then in the Atlantic. It's not going to do us any good. Stormwater brings with it to rivers, streams, lakes, everything on impervious surface it crosses. In other words, all the impervious surfaces that stormwater crosses, it's going to pick up and deposit it in our rivers and streams, lakes, and so forth. In the dry season, groundwater, and that's where we want stormwater to go. Groundwater keeps our rivers, probably 40% of the water coming through the Penny after a dry season is groundwater coming out. Some places in the state are losing some of that. And it's primarily been, they haven't, the implications of development. Their groundwater has dropped down some. Therefore, their streams in dry seasons are less, there's less flow. That's about it. Again, I'd like to say I'd like to come back, and certainly in 2014, and sit down, and by then hopefully have maybe outlined some ideas that begin to take this on and get your input. In fact, I'd like to get your input tonight, but with some time to think about it, your input would be extremely valuable. Again, the emphasis is on new development, and planning boards have got to be our big brother in this, I think, in this effort. We would also encourage you to include the management plan as an adjunct to your master plan. Some of our towns do that, and it seems to work quite all right. So with that, I'll be happy to try and answer any questions or whatever from the group. Yes, sir.
In your professional opinion, I haven't been able to read all the information in this handout, but in your professional opinion, is the quality of the water in these rivers that are tested, is that improving, the water?
Well,
The condition of the water, is that improving, or is it deteriorating? Or?
I would say we're holding our own.
Big pardon?
We're holding our own.
Holding our own.
Really, you know, if you want to go back far now.
Statistical data isn't really going extreme one way or the other.
Well, we're looking at 10 places on the river, and there are more places that are of current interest. Data loggers are starting to become part of the menu. And these are they're getting pretty small. They're the size of a shampoo bottle. You drop them in the river and leave them there for a week. And so we're going to start to get, what I'm saying is we're going to start to get data on a higher frequency basis. Those things spit out data on 5-minute intervals. What we're dealing with here are weekly, 2 weekly.
Is that what the black lines are in the details here? What's that represent? I see it in the charts.
The crossouts?
Yeah, blackouts.
Yeah, it didn't pass quality control.
Okay.
The data as we presented it to DES, we have to go through quality checks. They saw some things that say, hey, we won't use this. So,
Thank you.
yes, sir.
A couple of questions. One of them, what was the figure that you quoted for the amount of runoff from 1 acre of impervious ground cover?
The number runs from 300 to 500,000 gallons of water in 1 year. That's from 1 acre of impervious surface. And that assumes it's not captured in any way, it goes into a stream and it's gone.
Understood. Okay, and then just something that I noticed about the report, where E. coli is measured in Thornton, but I don't see that E. coli is measured any place else.
We have 3 places.
Oh, there are 3 places?
3 places, and one, I can't explain
I
it.
see. Yeah, Bridgewater. Yeah.
We're at Saheganett Falls, we do it there, we do it at Mooney Clark in Bristol. We tried to steer toward places where you see people swimming, and but that's as much as we've been able to do with the money we have. We get $15 a pop to do those things.
Right. And I've noticed that you monitor some of the major feeder streams, like the Smith River and the Newfound River,
Yes?
but not the Baker River.
Baker has its own,
Their own.
they have their own group.
Dick Flanders, remember?
Okay.
Dick
Yeah.
Flanders, and he's
Okay, so
got,
they.
it's
there's
being
some-
monitored, yes.
Okay. Great. But other than that, then, the only way we could impute from this report what the contribution of the Baker River is would be to look just upstream, in Campton, and then look at the Holderness Road Bridge in Plymouth,
Yeah.
and look at the differences, and that could
Yep.
maybe suggest to us how much the Baker is changing things.
E. coli, you rely a great deal on a lot of water taking the problem away. It's like running your wastewater treatment plants.
Right.
You rely on, a fair amount of water just to reduce the impact of what's going on.
That's all the questions I have. It's a really good and interesting report, and thank you for all of this work.
I have a question. On your local health concern, you mentioned the misuse of Livermore Falls. I'd heard the state was going to take that over.
There's an effort afoot.
The state
I was
owns
going
it.
to ask Max to
It's a state park.
Is it
and-
state park now?
Yeah, and they're starting to get interested.
expound. Yeah, there's a local group that's been very active, and
Yeah.
it's really, good things are
Holderness.
happening.
That seems like a real area that could be improved,
Yeah,
definitely.
Holderness has had to spend a lot of money on policing
Right.
the place.
Yeah. It
And,
definitely gets used a lot.
It could use a
You go
lot
up there on a hot day, there's like a dozen cars parked
there's
there.
more cars than they can handle.
Right, yeah.
I mean, it's, yeah. But the Parks and Recreation are getting involved, and there'll be some things happening.
Fishing, is Fish and Game involved too, in terms
Yeah,
of?
on the fringe.
Yeah, portage and just landing areas and stuff like that, I thought, maybe.
You mean access?
Yeah,
I
I have so much stuff coming across my desk,
I
so.
don't know what they're doing. They've been involved with Friends of the Pemmy.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
I have a couple of questions. Are you able to monitor stormwater pollution prevention plan applications along the PEMI or Army Corps of Engineer applications?
Are we as a,
Do you have access to that information?
boy, that's, you're now into engineering kinds of things. I mean, I see that kind of information on an alteration of terrain permit application. But engineers have come in and I don't know how they do it, but they have concluded X amount of water's running off, and this is what it was before, and this is what it's got to remain, and
They have rigorous standards. The other question I have is the Plymouth Conservation Commission worked with you?
we touch base, but not often.
So you might appreciate a little more involvement, maybe?
Absolutely. Yes.
That's, that answers my question.
Go ahead, John.
I have a couple. I'm not an engineer, so I cannot understand some of the abbreviations, but is mercury and arsenic being tested in the river?
Not by us.
What's that?
Not by us. Somebody does mercury tests because there isn't a surface water, to my knowledge, in the state that meets mercury requirements. We're all impaired for mercury.
Okay.
That's heavy-hitting lab stuff, in terms of...
On the impervious surface, when they measure this 300 to 500,000, is that with underground facilities to clean the water, or just a driveway that has no facilities at all to collect the stormwater and the water to purify it afterwards.
John, I think all that is an attempt to look at an amount of precipitation, you know, an inch or 2 inches or whatever of precipitation. If it fell on this large an area, how much water would that be?
Without any facilities.
Yeah, no facilities. It's just somebody's,
It's a potential.
yeah, yeah.
And
They're just trying to give us, I think, some kind of something to relate to in terms of how much water can come
doesn't
out.
all new development have to have some type of underground storage facility? It's, you know, except for private driveways and so forth. In other words, if it was Lowe's, or if it was the bank, or if it was McDonald's, when they build the parking lots and so forth, isn't it required to have some type of facility to collect the stormwater and purify it?
That's your site plan regulation and your
Right, so
subdivision regs.
consequently, if the 300,000 or 500,000, whatever it is, that pure, raw, impervious service.
Right.
So these figures
No,
are tremendously higher than what the normal new development would be.
new development would probably be trying to deal with that. Alteration of terrain law would, if, you know, you're talking about big projects, most likely they would have to submit plans to deal with
Okay, and
that
then
runoff.
the last question is, when you're talking something about some of the tests all over the country, as far as what the amount of groundwater that is going into the rivers and so forth, does that include states like Iowa and things like that that have one of the most and the most polluted river there is anywhere?
So agriculture is a huge,
What's that?
agriculture is a huge problem, yeah,
Right, so,
out there.
so if you took the Penny River and the Iowa River and put the two together and divided it by 2, you would have a lot higher pollution, for a better word, than the Pemigewasset River.
I think
Would have,
I would-
or even any part of New England.
Yeah, I think I would buy that, yeah. We don't have that much agriculture along the Penn.
No.
And we do have now the buffer kind of requirement and so forth.
The
We're not,
last question, now, leave it alone. Is there any plans of having the Lincoln North Woodstock and above Thornton included in the Pemmy River corridor plans?
well, we've got Thornton. The only two we're missing is Lincoln and Woodstock. They were not included in the original Rivers Management and Protection Program.
So we could clean the river to Plymouth to 101%, and we still would have a problem with the Pemmy River.
Theoretically, I think you're right. They are, however, also very sensitive about the river and its quality and so forth. I don't think they're, just because they're not in this thing doesn't mean that there aren't people up in those towns that are concerned about the river and maintaining it. But you're
your
right, they are not.
Your tests don't include those towns.
No, we pick up in Thornton.
I just have a quick question. Just a comment, actually, Max, and I hate to put you on the spot, but do you know offhand, just like what the contamination would be from the leftover horrors of the paper industry and coming from Lincoln and North Woodstock with dioxin and the mercury and heavy metals? They're still pretty prevalent in the riverbed. I know it is in Berlin. It's still there.
Yeah,
Yeah, but Berlin has only stopped that a
Depends
few
on
years
whether they
ago.
have leachate or not.
Very
Well, the
short
pulp,
period.
Yeah.
the pulp mill's been down 13 or so, but you're right, you're right.
Yeah,
I was just
we've
curious.
been
You're
down for
talking
50
4
years.
years, yeah.
Yeah.
you're talking about digging down into the,
Yeah, I'm just curious if you knew, just even
No.
as a anecdote or something, I was curious.
Don't you have satellites that have infrared cameras that can find hot spots?
They don't.
You have access to that?
I can't answer that.
No, I was just curious if, you know,
But you're right,
wanting to
they
sample.
can read aquifers from satellites and things like that, and, yeah.
Any change, because this is only 2012 data, once, Plymouth separated out their sewer drains, was there any reduction that was immediately visible or whatever in E. coli contamination around here? Don't recall.
Again, we only do
I
three,
know,
we do
right.
three
And
places.
that was probably always a storm event where you would
But,
get,
I think you're zeroing in on some voids in what we do. Should we be downstream and upstream of every wastewater treatment plant with something like this? Probably.
I
And,
know the improvement was made, I was just hoping, and it stands to reason it would.
The big
hopefully.
advantage there would be reducing the salt, because you have the salt on the roads, get into the drains, get into the
Right,
river.
and also impervious surface with water sluicing down Highland Street,
Right, well, it's just, the salt, which is bad for the river. I mean, there's just so much salt used on the roads, it's ridiculous.
well, the salt is getting into groundwater, and it's
Yeah.
getting into aquifers,
Right.
and it's getting into wells, and you can't get rid of it.
Right.
That's a state, that's local policy, obviously, but that's a state policy level decision that needs to be addressed.
I don't have to tell you, you drive 93 in the wintertime, how much salt they put on 93, right?
Yeah.
A white
how do you-
car, even when I don't have a white
That's
car, so
right.
you're right.
The only fix is reducing salt
Yeah.
on roads, and that's a tough one to,
We did that years ago, and the guy in charge of making that decision lost a niece in an accident, and the salt use went back up as soon as the accident happened.
this was on 93, or,
Yeah, it was like one of my dad's stories, so it was probably from the 20s or 30s or 40s,
It's
who knows?
a tough thing to solve.
yeah, it is. They talk about, they have pervious asphalt now, and not over in the PSU hockey rink parking lot, I think that's all pervious. They get away with a lot less maintenance, plowing, things like that, because it goes in. At the same time, they have to vacuum it once in a while to keep the pores open. Seems to work.
Well, thank you very much, Max.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. So please keep in touch with me, and we'll have you back when you've got some more stuff that you'd like us to hear. because we
Yeah,
Appreciate it.
right now Meredith seems to be the one kind of leading the pack in this area. And trying to come up with some regulation that
Right.
might help. Because they sit there and walk along, it's their drinking water, and won't even
I
sing.
know they've been having problems, so.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Max.
That brings us to item number 7, public comments. None? That brings us to item number 8, adjournment. We have motion.
I move that we adjourn.
Okay, seconded. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.